President Obama there chairing a rare head of state level meeting of the UN Security Council and speaking about passage of Resolution 2178 against ISIS and an international alliance to deal with border crossings. Now, for more on that address there and that unusual meeting, let's bring in two former presidential speechwriters. David Frum wrote for President George W. Bush and is now senior editor at The Atlantic, and David Kusnet was President Bill Clinton's chief speechwriter and is now with the Podesta Group. Hello to both of you. David Frum, let me start with you. The President and Ban Ki-moon both emphasizing there that this is unusual. There's only been 6 times that the Security Council has met at this high level. Of course, the choreography is already done, the alliance already set to pass this resolution, and yet, as you well know, presidential words matter a great deal, particularly as we go in to bomb a new country here. What did you make of the line the president just walked into speaking to those allies?
Well, what the president is evidently trying to do is to, after the fact, the bombing has already begun, build a network of legal authority. There is a question on what basis is the United States now at war in Syria? Remember, a year ago, when the president was proposing to bomb on the other side of this war, he insisted that he needed congressional permission. So this time he doesn't have that permission. So he is saying that he's allowed to do so under the grant of authority to President Bush to wage war in Iraq. He also doesn't have a Security Council resolution, so he would like that too. And again, the bombing has started. He's going to try to get the permission after, maybe on the theory it's better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission.
David Kusnet, the president ended his remarks there by saying that, you know, resolutions and rhetoric are not enough, and they need to be backed up by actions, not just from the United States, but by other member states here. Where does that leave him, sort of, you know, basically saying the speech that I gave is really not the important thing? Where does that leave him to go next?
I don't think that's what he was saying. I think he was speaking not only as the President of the United States, but as a world leader. And in a sense, it was symbolic of that in his second speech, he was speaking as President this month of the UN Security Council. I think he was in the tradition of American presidents, maybe especially progressive Democratic presidents like Presidents Kennedy and Clinton, who in a moment of crisis addressed the world first by saying that they want to work with the nations of the world to solve the problems of the world, and then by addressing a specific conflict that the United States is involved in and wants to enlist the support of the world community in. And what President Obama was doing, which is very much like what President Kennedy did in the early 60s and what President Franklin D. Roosevelt did during World War II, is paint a picture of a better world that can arise after we address issues like the conflict with ISIL.
David Frum, the president said once again there is no military solution to this problem. He said we have to address the underlying conditions, the oppression, the lack of opportunity, the hopelessness that lead to terrorism. Ban Ki-moon said it a little bit more poetically, I would think, in saying missiles kill terrorists, but good governance kills terrorism. These are messages that I think leaders understand, but perhaps the American people don't really want to hear. They want to hear we can do anything, especially when it comes to our military. Is the president expressing that concept that he believes is true? Is he expressing it properly?
Well, it's just a bizarre thing to say in the context of ISIL. I mean, the president mentioned there are 15,000 fighters, foreign fighters in Syria. Hundreds of them come from Britain, Canada, and Australia. These are not people who are coming from lands where there is a lot of misgovernment. They're coming from extraordinarily well-governed countries. And they're turning their back on good government, on places where there's plenty to eat and lots of jobs, in order to pursue violence. If there is ever a case study disproving the deprivation causes terrorism theory, it is ISIL in Syria and Iraq.
David Kusnet, one thing that the president did both in his speech earlier and also here is he is addressing some of our allies like Turkey and Qatar without actually directly, obviously, calling them out. But the measure about foreign fighters, also some of the rhetoric earlier, is in a way critical of their efforts in regard to combating terrorism. How do you think that those messages were conveyed, and how do you think they'll be received?
I think those messages were conveyed very artfully, because to return to the big point, he began by speaking, as American presidents do, at UN General Assembly meetings, by speaking of the problems of the world and by speaking of how the United States wants to work with all the nations of the world to solve those problems. And it was in that context, and I think with an additional framing of presenting the Russian intervention in Ukraine as an example of what the world community should be opposed to, of governments that try to have might make right. I think it was in that context that he was making an appeal to the better angels of the world community to oppose the violent extremism represented by ISIL and Al-Qaeda and some of those other groups. So context is everything. And I think President Obama made his appeal in a very good context, befitting the leader of the world's greatest power.
And David Frum, on that point of the extremism, you hear the president and Ban Ki-moon both saying, hey, this is not Islam when you look at the conduct of ISIL. And yet, from your perspective as a presidential speechwriter, how much can a president really do there in trying to wade into what is essentially a purist religious debate that spans Sunni, Shia, hundreds of centuries, and now some Sunni states saying, yeah, they're against ISIL, but other groups, obviously, as you were just saying, sympathize with them, at least pockets of extremism around the world.
Right. I don't know how much good it does for a president of the United States, a Christian president of the United States, to say what is and what isn't Muslim. And I think it's strange for the president of the United States to say whether God approves or disapproves actions. When he says no God condones these crimes, well, we all hope not. But it's a strange thing for the president to say. I mean, in the Bush years, we would have been very, very leery of having President Bush presume to speak on behalf of God. And I would have thought that President Obama's speechwriters would have felt some of that same modesty.
Interesting point there. David Frum and David Kusnet, thank you both for joining us on a busy day here at the UN. And we're going to continue to watch the special session ongoing of the Security Council there. Stay with us because the cycle is rolling on here on Wednesday, September 24th.